The airplane cabin was eerily quiet as I sat in my seat, my fingers tightly clutching the armrests. The dim lighting cast long shadows across the rows of seats, creating an atmosphere of foreboding. Outside, the night sky stretched endlessly, the darkness seeming to seep into the very heart of the aircraft. I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that gnawed at my insides, despite my attempts to calm myself. This trip was supposed to be a much-needed escape from the stresses of everyday life, but now it felt more like a descent into madness. As I glanced around the cabin, I noticed that most of the other passengers were asleep, their heads lolling against the windows or resting on travel pillows. But sleep eluded me, as the sense of dread continued to grow with each passing moment. A sudden chill ran down my spine, causing me to shiver involuntarily. A cold breeze swept through the cabin, ruffling my hair and sending a shiver down my spine. I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to ward off the chill, but it seemed to seep into my very bones. And then I heard it, a soft whisper in my ear, barely audible above the hum of the engines. "Lindsey." My heart skipped a beat as I turned to see a ghostly figure standing in the aisle beside me. Its eyes were empty sockets, its mouth twisted into a grotesque grin. I wanted to scream, to call for help, but my voice failed me. I was paralyzed with fear, unable to move as the ghostly figure drew closer. And then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure vanished into thin air, leaving me trembling and alone in the darkness. For the rest of the flight, I sat in stunned silence, my mind racing with questions and doubts. Had I imagined the ghostly apparition, or was it a sign of something more sinister lurking on board? When the plane finally touched down at its destination, I wasted no time in gathering my belongings and fleeing from the aircraft. But even as I made my way through the crowded airport, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every shadow seemed to conceal a lurking presence, every stranger a potential threat. By the time I reached my hotel, I was on the verge of hysteria. I locked myself in my room, barricading the door with furniture and frantically searching for any sign of the ghostly figure that had haunted me on the plane. But the room was empty, the only sound the faint hum of the air conditioning. I collapsed onto the bed, my body trembling with exhaustion and fear. I knew I wouldn't be able to sleep, not with the memory of the ghostly apparition etched into my mind. As the hours dragged on, I tossed and turned, my dreams haunted by visions of death and despair. When morning finally came, I awoke to find myself alone in the hotel room, the events of the previous night seeming like a distant nightmare. But as I prepared to leave the hotel and explore the city, a sense of unease settled over me once more. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that the ghostly presence from the plane was still lurking nearby. Determined to confront my fears, I set out into the city, my eyes scanning the crowds for any sign of the ghostly figure. But no matter where I went, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that hung over me like a dark cloud. And then, as evening fell and the streets grew quiet, I saw it, the ghostly figure from the plane, lurking in the shadows of an alleyway. I turned and ran, my heart pounding in my chest as I raced through the darkened streets. I didn't stop until I reached the safety of my hotel room, where I collapsed onto the bed, my body shaking with fear and exhaustion. But even as I tried to convince myself that it had all been a hallucination, I couldn't shake the feeling that the ghostly figure was still out there, waiting for me, watching my every move. And so, as the night closed in around me, I huddled in my hotel room, my mind consumed by terror and uncertainty. I knew that I would never be able to escape the haunting that had followed me from 30,000 feet, that it would follow me wherever I went, for as long as I lived.